Welcome to the JPP, the Jewish Philanthropy Podcast. JPP with David M. Cohen, rabbi, lawyer, fundraiser, therapist, and author. Money makes the world go round. It makes different people do different things. In this podcast, we explore views of money and how money is used to impact lives around the world. Each week, we'll engage with another interesting personality in the fascinating and diverse world of Jewish philanthropy. Let's begin now.
Why come to Car Sharks? Why not? Our core beliefs and our foundation is built on customer service. No does not exist in our vocabulary. Think Amazon for cars, except we'll go to the Gaza Strip and back in a yarmulke for you. Service doesn't end when you get your car. Every single customer has my personal cell phone number. So if you're looking for a car, if you want to get out of your car, carsharksauto.com or 516-399-1500.
I'd like to welcome to the show this morning Rachel Cyrulnik, who is an incredibly talented, lovely, not-for-profit professional, somebody who has vast experience in the realm of fundraising and is a consultant to many, many not-for-profits. And Rachel, welcome, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me this morning. Just for background, maybe you wanted to speak for a minute or two, just talk a little bit about your organization, your company, some of the people you work with. Just give us a little bit of a flavor before we get to your background about what you're doing exactly today.
Sure. Well, first of all, David, thanks so much for having me on your show. I'm excited to be with you today. So my company is Raise Nonprofit Advisors. We work with small to mid-sized nonprofits with diverse missions, and we do anything that touches revenue generation, focusing on fundraising. Our approach is really we have a dual approach to our work. The first is our strategies are data-driven and based on the ground experience of the organizations that we're working with, so based in reality. And then the other piece is a strong focus on project management and the implementation of our recommendations. I've often found when I was working before I became a consultant, working in-house in organizations, organizations often got very wise advice from the consultants they were working with, but the gap between actually knowing what they should be doing and actually doing it was very vast. And so we try to close that gap and have done so successfully for our clients by using customized project management tools and through regular communication with them. So we stay on board and we're very invested in the success of their work, and we kind of make it very manageable using project management tools.
So implementation and ensuring that the lofty concepts and the great ideas are rooted in reality and come to fruition is certainly something that you add,
Yeah, you got it. That's really what sets us apart.
Yeah,
I would.
Tell me a little bit just about your team. I noticed when I looked at your website that it's an all-female shop, which is great. It's
yeah, like the WNBA, right? All-star team.
So tell me just a little bit about kind of who works for you, what kind of team you have. I'd love to hear a little bit about that too.
Sure. So I happen to know several very talented women. It's not all women by design. So, it's equal opportunity employment. But our team is really, they're experts in the field. They all have at least a decade of experience working in nonprofit organizations. And the nice thing about our firm is it's a team. It's not just one consultant. So our clients really benefit from the full range of expertise of our team. We have consultants focused on the strategy and data analysis, and they do the development assessments, the planning, the development plans, surveys, and then we have moves management consultants, which really work hand in hand with our clients on ensuring that they are that the cultivation is on the front burner, that they're meeting with donors. When should I be meeting? How do I ask for the meeting? How much should I ask for? When should I follow up? How do I change that relationship from a friendship to a give me money. So doing that. And then we also have experts that help with it, communications, design, sort of the additional pieces that we help clients with as well.
Amazing. Listening to you, it just reinforces for me kind of the level of sophistication that's involved in fundraising today. You know, many people think, oh, fundraiser, like you go knock at somebody's door, you ask them for a few bucks. Like it's such a sophisticated apparatus that your company is, of course, sensitive to, and brings that expertise and brings that professionalism, and really helps organizations, like the organization I'm involved in, and many others that are involved. It's just so necessary in today's sophisticated milieu for us to be as professional as possible and to be using data analytics and to really understand kind of what we're doing. So that's incredible.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that the fields of nonprofit management and generally, and Jewish nonprofits specifically, have really come a long way and really professionalized and are adapting much from the business world. And it's really, we're able to do it all for a good purpose, right? I know everybody that's listening to this show is in it because they're there to make a difference. And so that's, coupling those, the business acumen with the heart and the mission, I think is really a way to kind of fulfill your mind and your heart with your with what you're doing every day.
Terrific. So Rachel, tell me a little bit about your upbringing, your family background, your educational background, and in particular, this is the JPP. So we're always interested in the Jewish Philanthropy podcast in terms of people's relationship and impact of money on their life. So I'm curious, kind of at an early age, kind of what your perspective on money was, or your exposure to it.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a small town in central New Jersey. My parents worked hard, and the focus was really on midot and values. My dad used to wake up before sunrise to commute over an hour to work every day, and my mom would take on extra jobs to send my 3 siblings and myself to day school. Mm-hmm. And to help cover the cost of tuition, we received scholarship. And I recognized that the money was not necessarily the focus in my house, we all felt we had what we needed, and we're happy with what we had. But I saw how it could be helpful as a means to an end, and we really benefited from the impact of philanthropic dollars, my siblings and myself. And so I think that was really the kind of one of the core motivators for me to make this my career.
It's interesting. Obviously, every family is different. I'm a little bit curious, kind of like, so you were aware that that your parents were applying for scholarship. That was something, I guess, that you were aware of.
Yes. Yeah, it was really interesting. There was actually, and I remember the school that I went to, the donors were kind of really held up in high esteem, and it was like I really appreciated it. It was I noticed it and I appreciated it, and it's something that I think one of our core areas right now is day school. I worked at the YU School Partnership, and it's something that really kind of helped mold my professional trajectory.
That's fascinating. That's really interesting, in the sense that a lot of times donors are more prone to open their hearts and open their wallets by extension when they feel that there's a real impact. And when you find it very often that, philanthropists tend to give in the realms where they themselves were impacted in their youth. I can think of so many of my donors where they're very sympathetic to children with disabilities or children that struggle because they themselves maybe struggled in their youth. And it's interesting to me also how you kind of at a young age came to appreciate the importance and the impact that philanthropy can make, and that kind of inspired your trajectory on some level.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is really key for fundraisers to understand, because when you go into a donor meeting, that's really the fundraiser's job, to understand what makes that person tick. Right. Understand what is it that this person really is going to get passionate and excited about, by asking open-ended questions and just getting to know that person, so that when the time comes to ask them to invest in your cause, you can make a really targeted pitch that's going to speak to them.
Right. I think that's really like the ABCs of fundraising, and it's such a key point. We're often so kind of not caught up in a bad way. We're passionate, but we're maybe nervous, or we're like focused on our ask, and we forget that it's all about the donor.
Yeah. Focus on the pitch. Like, this is what I need to get across. But like, before we get there, first, most importantly is, where's the donor coming from?
It takes a lot of confidence, because you can't you can be scripted in your ask, but you can't really be so scripted in your sitting quietly and listening to what the donor has to say and who they are. So it really takes a lot of self-control and confidence that you'll be able to handle kind of whatever it is.
On your feet, exactly.
Right, exactly. Which is, I think, a great part of this job. To be able to think quick on one's feet and to be able to adapt that which you're hearing to that which you're bringing, to the table, which is great.
And to be building your a collection of stories, like a storehouse of stories and of examples of how your organization really, is in line with what inspires that person, and funding opportunities, even if you don't have them on the spot, you're able to take back and develop. And I think that's important too. It's not always like, oh, this is what you do. This is what is important to you. Here's what we have. It's very, sometimes you don't have all the answers, and it's okay to say to a donor, that's amazing that's your passion. If they ask you any question, you know the answer. That's a great question. Let me get back to you. Better than sometimes just making something up that you're not sure about is, right. Really going back and doing fact checking. And I think donors appreciate and respect that you're taking them seriously enough to go back and do the due diligence.
Cool. I want to add just a quick story about the point you just made about storytelling. I was at a dinner for a yeshiva this week in my neighborhood in the 5 towns. It was a yeshiva, an institution from Israel, and it was clear at the event. And I know about this institution, but I'm not really holding in it today. But it was clear at the event that they're struggling financially. It was very apparent, and they were very open about it. And at a later juncture in the evening, one of the rebbeim, one of the mentors, the teachers, basically got up, and he told a story. And it was really the first time the whole night they got my attention. He told a story about a guy who came to the institution. He couldn't read Hebrew, and he couldn't pay tuition, and how they looked at each other, the teachers, and they said, how are we going to have this young man not be able to study, Chumash, study Bible, study with his kids, and we have to make this happen, and we have to raise the money. And it kind of reinforced to me, I probably don't tell enough stories. It's so important, like you're saying, to have a few real, concrete, impactful stories that really, make a difference.
On the fundraiser side, it's like, we know how much we need to raise. So it's very easy to talk to donors about what's the budget gap, but that's not inspirational. Like, donors don't exist to meet your budget gap. They're there to make a difference. And your job is to show them how investing in your cause is going to help them achieve their philanthropic goals.
Right. Exactly. Okay, cool. So let's move back. Let's talk a little bit about presumably graduate high school and move on to college. When we go to college, so that's when we really begin our career plans really, begin to take shape. Take us a little bit through kind of your undergraduate, your graduate study, and tell us a little bit just kind of how that developed and how that contributed to where you are today.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I was before high school, before college. Even high school, I think, had a big impact on my career. And I'll get to college in a moment. When I was in high school, I remember one day I saw a piece of mail on the kitchen table, and it was a direct mail appeal from Children of Chernobyl, which was a nonprofit that used to take children from Chernobyl after the major nuclear spill in that area in the 1980s over the coming years. So take them to Israel to rebuild their lives. Right. And their parents would join them. And looking back, I could say that was really an effective direct mail appeal because I was moved to do something about it. And I started a school-wide campaign and raised $10,000 among my friends in school and their families. And it was a fun experience also because the organization was a pet cause of Nancy Spielberg. So I was invited to attend their star-studded event and got to wear a fancy dress. So that was rewarding for me as a 15.
Did you see it at the Milky Way restaurant? They just announced this week that it's reopening in California, in Los Angeles.
Oh, that's nice to hear. Yeah, we used to go and see Mrs. Spielberg. It was always fun. Yeah. And so that was kind of, the initial vote of confidence that, like, this is something I could do as a career. And I continued involvement in nonprofits throughout college. I went to Stern College as part of Yeshiva University. And then my graduate degree is from NYU in nonprofit management. And then after that, I worked as I mentioned, in large nonprofits for over 10 years. And during that time, I encountered a lot of the challenges that I realized are commonplace in development, and recognized that I was having some success building an approach to addressing these issues, and made a career shift about 5 years ago to consulting to amplify this approach and help other organizations raise more money more effectively and with less stress and more satisfaction.
Were you unique, like in Stern College? Like, did you see a lot of your peers, colleagues, other women interested in this career track, or did you feel like you were kind of really like a lone ranger in terms of like wanting to go into like raising funds for not-for-profits? This is a curiosity of mine.
I think people were involved in a lot of causes, but I think professionally, it certainly wasn't like, one of the most common career paths. In fact, myself, I wasn't sure myself. I was my undergraduate degree was in journalism, communications, and I remember as I was deciding on graduate school, I applied to journalism school, and I applied to for a degree in public administration. I remember sitting there thinking, when I got both acceptance letters, thank God, like, what am I going to do? Which way should I go? And I decided, you know what? As a journalist, I'm going to report on the news. But as a fundraiser, I could really impact the news. I could really, affect change, the issues that I care about. And my journalism degree ended up not going to waste because, writing is pretty an important skill in many fields, but in development, in terms of writing proposals, making the case for support. So I think at the end of the day, it was a circuitous path from my undergraduate degree, but one that worked.
Okay, amazing, cool. So in those, like, let's say in that decade of time when you really were working for like major kind of, bigger type of not-for-profits before you shifted to your own, building your own company and consulting, share with us maybe a little bit, who are some of the key personalities that kind of, that influenced you, that inspired you, that motivated you, that you really learned from?
Sure. Well, I started my career at UJ Federation of New York. And initially I worked under Elisa Rubin Kershan, which was an amazing experience. She's a great thinker and a wonderful person. And just observing really their top-notch fundraisers, John Ruskay at UJA. And then I moved over to Yeshiva University to the YU School Partnership, which has since merged and it was one of the network agencies that became Prisma, which is now an umbrella network agency for day schools. And I saw Dan Foreman, who's an excellent relationship builder as well. So it was really, I think, working at a large nonprofit, kind of there's those professional development opportunities that are available. The small ones you're learning, there's a lot of grit, you're doing it yourself. And I think it's nice for thinking about your overall career to have that balance, because there's benefit from both a large and small organizations, professionally speaking.
Interesting. You mentioned John Ruskay. So I used to live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I think he lived maybe like 2 blocks from me. And I remember when he stepped down and when he retired after his illustrious career, what were his strengths? What really made him the leader that he was?
I think he really came across in an authentic way. I sometimes joke that there's 2 types of fundraisers. There's the really hardcore, like, we're going to get to this, like, I'm going to, pursue you until you give. And then there's the nice, friendly people that are just good relationship people that are building relationships and channeling it for a purpose, for a good cause. So I think he was the latter. It was funny, after he retired, I saw him on the subway in Manhattan. And I was like, is that John Ruskay? There was a big gap between where he was and I was at the beginning of my career, obviously. And I remember it looked like John Ruskay, just with longer hair. He had a little bit of a hippie effect to him. Yeah. And I went over and I said, are you John Ruskay? And he said, yeah. And I thanked him and he said, I can tell you're a fundraiser because you came over to me on the train.
That's terrific. That's so terrific. I have that all the time. Like, we were just recently in Florida, and I saw this guy on the plane, and I said to my wife, I know that guy. And she's like, you think you know everybody? Like, that's like, you always think you know everybody. So no, I really do know this guy. But it is a certain personality type of. Yeah.
Well, first of all, the Jewish right, obviously, is one, there's one degree of separation, and it's a small world. But I do think that is an important characteristic of fundraisers, that they're willing to go out there and meet people. I think it's very easy to sit behind your desk and to, do analysis and work on, dinner invites, and that stuff is important, but to balance that and to really harness the extrovert in you to go out there and meet with people, certainly key. And not only in terms of raising money, but in terms of networking and building your base of support and your leadership, it's really critical.
I heard from one of my mentors, many people think they're fundraising, but they're not actually fundraising because there's so many pieces to what we do. And of course, you can be busy all day at your desk, etc., but really kind of pounding the pavement and building those relationships and going to events and meeting new people and networking through your networks to meet new people is really kind of where it's at, and really so critical and so essential.
Yeah, I think time management is an overlooked but very important skill to have as a fundraiser, because as you said, there's so many different ways that you could be spending your time, and so just being able to prioritize, and that's what a lot of the what we offer our clients in terms of project management and using data to understand what's been effective for you and where should you be focusing your energies, right? A lot of times we'll find clients like, here's an example. We had a client that was really spending a lot of time working on newsletters and focusing on donors under $1,000 and above, under $1,000. And we said, you're spending your time, you're going on donor meetings. Let's just shift, and try to elevate people's philanthropy and focus on donors that are giving at the higher levels, and shift from, focusing on the newsletter, see if we can shift that to somebody else's portfolio. And so that you can really be spending your time and, meeting people with the ability to give more aspirational levels to your institution. And that really became like a guide before he would start, embarking on a new project. That was always, we were reminding, is this in line with, what we agreed to do? And that really made a difference to the bottom line.
Oh, okay, great. Were you at Yeshiva University, like during the really lean years, during the really difficult, challenging years of the economic downturn and Madoff and things like that?
I was for about 5 years at Yeshiva University during some of that time. And I think it was particularly challenging, as I mentioned, I was at the YU School Partnership, which their role, scholarship was of key import to the school. And so that was really where donors were focused. And so to raise money, for day schools was kind of like a luxury. So I had to figure out how to get some major gifts from these people, who I'm going to be getting major gifts from, because the university's donors were really being, reserved for scholarship. And when we went to day school donors, their focus is on their school. So we had to kind of carve out a unique audience for this organization, and unique messaging to make sure that we could get our core of major gift donors.
So it speaks to kind of having to be flexible and adaptable in the profession. You obviously are, today, thankfully, Baruch Hashem, you're like the consummate professional. I'm sure people see you on the train, they go, "Hey, that's Rachel Cyrulnik, etc." But I'd love to hear you share with our audience about some of the challenges kind of you've seen throughout your career. We all know that this isn't the easiest of professions, but there are times when it's easier and there are times when it's more difficult. Maybe share a little bit with our audience some of the moments that stick out in your career that were challenging. Of course, they were opportunities, but what were some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, David, because fundraising, I think people, first of all, managing expectations, like you're asking people for money, they're not all going to say yes, and fundraisers have to have a bit of a thick skin in order to be able to thrive in this line of work. Mm-hmm. I'll just give you two quick examples. The first is from the beginning of my career as a fundraiser. It was around a time they were seeing early signs of the recession that was about to hit. And then at the time, it was hard for me to tell whether I was doing a good job and it was just circumstances, or whether I should have been doing something differently. Mm-hmm. So, looking back, I was new. I'm sure there was room for me to grow. But I think this is something that fundraisers grapple with generally, like parsing out what's due to them and what's circumstantial. Right. And I once saw a Venn diagram that I like to reference. It had in one circle what matters, and the other circle, what's in your control, and the overlap is where we're supposed to be focusing our energy. So, we could be spending a lot of emotional energy worrying about whether, how things are going to pan out. Is this donor going to give, what's going on in the market? And that's completely natural, but these are circumstances out of our control. And sometimes stopping to think about whether there's anything we could really do about them helps to focus on areas where you do have more control.
Interesting. That's a very important part. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
And then the other example that I was thinking of, we were talking about my work at YU. So when I began working to build up this base of major donors, which we defined at $10,000 plus, it took me a lot longer than I thought it would. Even getting to half of that amount was a challenge. And I would go in the first couple months, almost up to a year, I would go from meeting to meeting and get no's. And it was really demoralizing. And I began to be like, what's my supervisor going to think? But he was really great, and he was a partner. He attended the meetings with me, and that is really critical as a fundraiser, to have a team of people that support you in this work. Mm-hmm. And one day, almost a year in, we hit a turning point, and the relationships that we were building were more solid. Mm-hmm. And all the goodwill that we were banking began to show returns. And then once it started, we got real momentum, and we were able to go back to those donors who said no and get them on board as well. And we were able to build a very strong cohort of donors over $10,000 plus. So, I think I learned to be patient from that. Like, fundraising is about relationships at the end of the day, and you can't create that overnight. Right. And we do a lot of coaching now. Because of my experience, I can really empathize with clients, but also reassure them when they're doing the right things, and when it's just that it just takes time. And oftentimes fundraising seems like magic. Like, you see these 24-hour campaigns that raise hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. But really, they're only possible because of the years of hard work that came before that campaign.
Right, exactly. So it's a marathon. It's not a sprint, and there are many different components, and it takes a lot of time. And obviously, when you have a startup organization, so it's very different. And a lot of times, even if we're not a startup, but we're building, we're growing, we're reaching out, and we're trying to gain name recognition and potency and influence with people, and that of course takes time. Nothing like that's meaningful and impactful happens overnight. What are you seeing in terms of trends out there? 2019. What are you seeing in the fundraising world? Kind of what's new? What's hot? What's the best in line organizations? What are they doing? What kind of stands out from what you're seeing?
Well, you referenced earlier impact philanthropy. That's a term that's been used a lot recently. So donors don't only want to see the outputs of their philanthropy, but they want to see the outcomes. So to give you an example, like not how many mouths were fed, but have we addressed issues of systemic poverty? Mm-hmm. So giving to address the root cause rather than symptoms. And thinking about how donor motivation has changed in recent years, which we spoke about, this makes sense. So donors used to give out of a sense of responsibility, like the Jewish tax, or this is right. The class, or my parents did it, so I have to continue. And now they give more out of a sense to create impact. Those other factors are at play as well, often. But impact is really important. And I think that's playing out across the board. We've seen a lot of trickle down. So you're run-of-the-mill donor, right? Running for a cause or starting a GoFundMe page, like taking philanthropy into their own hands and making an impact. Mm. And I think kind of a shift away from big bucket philanthropy to focus more on targeted gifts to niche causes, to pet causes. So that's important to think about when you're developing messaging for your case. Another really fascinating trend, I think, is the disruption of millennials and Gen Z. I know I've seen like a lot of organizations where the more senior leadership is scratching their heads, like how do we get these people involved? How do we get them to step up and do their part? And then I think the younger generation is thinking about how their participation looks, and it's not necessarily the same way that the participation of older generations look like. I think we're often trying to put sort of young leadership into these specialty programs and boxes, like young leadership committees, when really
Right.
perhaps they should have a seat at the adult table.
Interesting. I'm seeing more, to your first point, I'm seeing more and more donors that I speak with who are really taking their philanthropy seriously and are really kind of thinking a lot about, what are my niche causes? I don't want to be spread out everywhere. I want to really I have limited philanthropy, I have limited means, and I really want to make a difference. I want to really feel like I'm making a real impact. I think, I wonder what you think. I mean, I think there's a little bit of it's a trickle down effect from what we see in the general world outside the Jewish world of philanthropic giving. This whole idea of the giving pledge, and leaders like Bill Gates and others who are really, starting the Clintons, like people making these crazy positive initiatives of, curing cancer, curing poverty, et cetera, et cetera. I think that big thinking, which you alluded to in your first point, that, people want to get to the core, they want to get to the root, and they want their hard-earned dollars to really be making an impact and channeled, most persuasively, it's probably a better word than that for this, but channeled most impactfully in the areas that they care about most.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is that influence is trickling down to the Jewish world. And I think that fundraisers, first of all, have to be aware of that in terms of their own messaging. And I think that they should be remembering constantly that this is what drives giving, right? So they have to be connecting donors' gifts with the impact that they want to see. So you can't be forgetting about, okay, I got this person's $25,000 check off the list, but rather, how is that money being spent, and going back and stewarding that donor and say that money that you gave, it went to create, a maker space for this school, or it went to buy backpacks for these kids in Israel. Like, it went to get, animal or art therapy for these children, whatever the situation may be, to really keep donors engaged, and they want to be a part of it, right? They're in it because of the impact, and they want to feel like a partner. So I think, it's for Israel-based organizations, it's especially important to keep the lines of communication open, because, the good stuff is happening over there. The money's being raised here. There has to be a channel of communication. It's not just like America's an ATM machine. So I think that's really important for all organizations to remember.
Amazing. And also the second point that you made about the millennial, the different generations, and kind of, we always have to be sensitive. That I think someone was mentioning to me recently, the idea that many millennials are going to, one of my colleagues at work was telling me that he was in Palm Beach, Florida this week for a conference, and a significant philanthropist spoke with them. And he was sharing how, like, millennials are going to be inheriting like millions and billions of dollars, in the next decade. And we really do have to figure out kind of how to engage and cultivate this demographic.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, you always hear from major gift donors, like, I don't want to be the only ones. I want to be leveraging my gift, and to really capitalize on those opportunities to bring millennials into the fold, and to kind of, educate and set. I think a fundraiser's job really focuses generally a lot on education of the community and why its cause is important. And the same is true for millennials. So kind of setting, letting them do things in their own way, but also kind of sharing with them the importance of giving, right? It's not just about rolling up your sleeves, but it's giving in multiple ways, right? So that, I think, is an important message to be sharing.
Okay, cool. So there's always a tricky question, and we've spoken before kind of offline, and I know that you've had great success and been able to cultivate gifts in the millions of dollars. Maybe share a little bit with our audience, to the degree that you're able to. Obviously, confidentiality will be kept here, but a little bit about some of the most significant or substantial gifts you've played a part in soliciting and closing.
Sure. That's the fun stuff, right? So yes, I'll just talk to you sort of generally about the gifts and kind of the observations that I've gleaned from working on, multi-million-dollar gifts, that might be helpful for other professionals to know about. So yes, I recently I've closed several multi-million-dollar gifts. Most recently, I helped a client close a $7.5 million gift.
Wow.
I'm working on one that is larger right now for a capital campaign. It's funny about capital. My husband was saying to me recently, capital campaign seems so easy to raise money for. Why don't you just, forget about annual and make everything capital?
Right.
It's true. Annual fundraising is, you're schlepping along. Can I move you from 1,000 to 1,500 or 1,800? And then capital, it's like, okay, here's $500,000, right? So
let me just interject on this point for 1 second, really quickly. A colleague of mine shared with me this week a frustration in the sense that last year they were engaged in a dual capital / regular budget campaign. Mm-hmm. And they were very successful. The numbers were very high because capital was kind of enveloped in that. And now like the higher ups are basically saying, well, you need to produce the same numbers next year. And like, don't they understand that was like a special capital campaign? It's like, no, once you produce those numbers, they want you to keep producing those numbers.
This is like the problem that fundraisers face anytime they secure a new gift or like a one-off gift, like, oh, how am I going to replicate this? So I do think it's important to set expectations with your supervisors about one-time gifts and to be realistic, like oftentimes when I do projections, I recommend aggressive and conservative projections so that, let's be realistic, it would be amazing if we get $100,000 as a repeat gift from this person, but they really said it's a one-time gift. So let's set the conservative at 0 because we don't expect it again, and the aggressive at 100. And then at the end, your projections could end up somewhere in the middle. So right. I think that's an important point to remember.
Okay. So this is going back. So talk a little bit about this. You said you've been working on a bigger gift now than the 7.
Yeah. Right. So, the thing that's really funny, the thing that struck me about these major gifts as I was progressing and some in my career is how similar it is to close a large gift like that as it is to close a major gift, but it's still a major gift, but a much smaller major gift, like say a $25,000 gift or an $18,000 gift. It's still the same skill, just that the stakes are raised. Once you're raising a major gift, you need to have a certain level of high touch to the donor, professionalism, making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. And that really remains to be the case at the higher levels as well.
Is there any difference? I mean, there must be some difference, no? Like what obviously there's a lot in common. What would you say though is the difference between asking somebody for 10 million and 10,000? What is there?
Well, I think for those special, usually when you're asking for a major gift like that, it's not just for, an annual, gift renewal. So really, I think it's all of the stuff we've been talking about, really understanding the donor's motivations, doing your research, understanding their capability, understanding who should be making the ask, has to all be really expertly handled. So that is really important. And like I said, usually those are for special campaigns, endowment, capital. There's usually naming opportunities associated with the gift. And so there's a lot more planning that goes into play. So whereas you may be closing a major gift for an annual campaign, for capital, you're going to be first doing a lot of due diligence and planning for the campaign before you even begin the soft phase of a campaign where you're raising that kind of money.
I'd imagine also not that we sneeze at we want to make sure we get the $50,000 gift as well, in our coffers. But I'd imagine there's probably a lot more documentation. Somebody gives a $50,000 pledge, you may or may not even you'll thank them, but you might not write up a contract or something like that. But I can't imagine people get, multi-million pledges.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I was just talking to a client about this yesterday. Their organization is a much more informal, way of dealing with donors. And right. I recommended that they ask their donors, they send them a gift agreement to sign. It's really in the best interest of the organization, because once you're raising, multiple millions of dollars, you want to make sure that that's protected. And so, every organization, listen, at the end of the day, you're not sending anybody to jail who's not paying their
taking it up to court, right? What are you going to do? Right.
But it's still nice.
It concretizes it. Makes it much more serious, right?
Yeah, and I think, every organization has their own culture and their own feel. So the language will be, will be for some more formal, some more informal. But there are those pieces thinking about the pledge payment schedule and stewardship reporting back to the donor who's given. If there's been for a specific program or project, what do they need to report back? All of that plays a role as well and needs to be thought about in terms of the time spent. Like, it's not only going to be just, securing this gift and you're done, but like it's going to require the organization invest in professional capacity to steward this gift.
Okay, amazing. Okay, good. Let's talk a little bit about fundraising burnout. It's certainly something that I just met a gentleman this morning. It was funny. I was in local shul and local synagogue, and I met this new individual. And he actually shared with me that he used to be a fundraiser and now he's in for-profit work. Like, I didn't say, oh, you got burnt out, but like it happens. People. It's a difficult profession to be in for extended periods of time. What are some of the guidance, advice that you give your clients when you see that they're in a lull, when they're not as motivated, when they're struggling a little bit?
Yeah, well, first of all, it really is that's a very real truth. I think that I heard the average job span. I read a quote, a stat that the average job span in a development position is 16 months.
Okay.
It's like, you sit down at your desk, you get up, and you're done, right? I think that the primary cause is that often organizations hire a fundraiser and then they wash their hands of the responsibility of fundraising, like, okay, we hired someone, this person's got it, right? But it's not a silver bullet, and it's important to set expectations with your colleagues when you start a fundraising position that you're going to need the support of them as a team. Mm-hmm. I think that's beneficial, for both the individual, the professional, and for the organization, because nonprofits lose a lot of time and money when a fundraiser leaves a position. I mean, they lose the organizational memory and the relationships. Those are both really important components of a development professional's job. And if they lose professionals to burnout, they sacrifice both. So it behooves the organization to support and to provide professional mentorship and development to their professionals, because the alternative is to lose their professionals. But in terms of the fundraiser side, a couple things. So first of all, I think celebrating success. A lot of times Jewish fundraisers would be a little bit type A, right? And we set high goals, and then if we don't make the full goal, or like we fail if we didn't get them. But realize, like, even if we wanted to get $100,000 from this donor and we ended up with 50, right? Like, recognize that that's still a success, right? We got money that we didn't have before. I think that's really important. As I mentioned, building a team that supports you, both professional and lay. And treat yourself kindly, like to not, to where we're talking about that Venn diagram, like to remember that if something doesn't go your way, like if what's in your control and what's not, and to give yourself a break from work as well. Do the things that make you feel instantly better. I once heard someone speaking about the happiness quotient. Like, what are the activities that just make you feel happy, and spend time doing them? Because, we just like in social work or, caretaking professions, there's, the concept care for the caregiver. We need care for the fundraiser as well.
Right. It makes a lot of sense. I'm going to ask you now a little bit of it's kind of a question that kind of flowed from what you were saying. It kind of registered something in my mind. Every organizational structure is different, but I work in a very big organization with a lot of different fundraisers, and I think it's sometimes a delicate balance between there's healthy competition amongst fundraisers on a team. Everybody has their own goals. Everybody wants to kind of succeed and get ahead. It's that type A personality we spoke about. At the same time, you kind of rely on your colleagues and your peers. There's a necessity for support, and we're all in this together. It's an interesting, I don't know if there's what to say about this. It's just an interesting balance at times. It's at the same time a supportive, but also at times adversarial atmosphere. And I wonder if you've kind of, in your consulting career, have you seen this dynamic with some of your clients or some of the not-for-profits you work with?
interesting. It's an interesting point. My clients, the grass is always greener, right? Like I might work primarily with small and mid-sized nonprofits, and the development staff is generally smaller. It's a couple of team members. So, they're like, oh, if we had only had more staff, we could get more done, right? And then when you have more staff, you're like, oh, there's more competition, right? But I think that really varies, I think, organization by organization. And I think it's up to the organization to set a culture of, we are in it to win it. What one fundraiser secures, even if they're on my donor list or whatever, is a success for the organization. We're all on the same team, with the same mission in mind. With that said, I do think it's important for organizations to set clear goals, to set clear, policies around relationship management, who is overseeing which donors, so that and communication when there is overlap, so that nobody feels like their turf was stepped on, or they weren't aware of an interaction that happened with someone that they've been carefully stewarding. And I think that's just part of being a respectful colleague. And I think it's a small world, and these colleagues will resurface. I mean, my team is really built of people that I've worked with in different capacities over the course of my career, and that I've found to be collaborative, because I've encountered both types, and it always, I think, will serve you best in the end to be the collaborative model.
Right. I just remember, it's a story that just came to mind. I'm torn if I just shared it out. I guess we could always...
Do it.
But early in my career, so it was interesting. There was an individual who was a renowned philanthropist who I happened to have had a relationship with, and in the place I was working, they had kind of recently instituted a system where you were supposed to kind of put your name down by the donor, so that others in the organization would know that you're working on that particular person. But since I hadn't really yet, I learned from this, but since I hadn't yet secured a gift from him, I kind of had this thing in my head. I didn't really put my name down until I secured a gift. And I was working on this person for a long time and didn't really produce anything. And then by mazel, just happened to be one of my colleagues who was significantly younger, happened to come across this person and call them up and got a $5,000 gift, which was a very nice gift, but certainly much less than what this people's capacity was. And it became a little bit of a tension, because here I was working on this person. I was only working on this person for a number of years, but this person who had been working on this family for 2 minutes had secured a gift and I hadn't. And it became stressful, and this person was like, well, I got a gift and it's my donor now, etc. So we went to a supervisor, and it was very profound what the person said. This person said, "It's not your gift, David. It's not your gift, Joe. It's the organization's. It's the organization's donor. You have to look at it that way. We're all in it together," which I liked. But it sometimes it's hard for people to really buy into that. But it's true. You were talking also about fundraisers have to take care of themselves. So I'm curious if you share with our audience a little bit, kind of, what are some of the ways that Rachel Cyrulnik takes care of herself, or what are some of the things maybe that people wouldn't guess about you that you do to kind of sustain and nurture yourself in this challenging profession?
Yeah. So I'm a busy person. I invest a lot in my business as a small business owner. I'm also a mom. I have 5 kids.
Wow. Okay. I also have 5 kids. I know what 5 kids is. I'm not a mom, but a dad, but 5 kids is a lot of kids.
Literally a handful, right? And they're great. My oldest is 13. My youngest is 5 months. And so I spend a lot of time, obviously, a lot of my time goes to my kids and to developing my firm. And I have a hobby bucket list for another time, right? All the things that I want to have actual hobbies. But for now, I really do what I was recommending, which is clearing time for de-stressors, recharging, relaxing. I love music. So going to concerts, gardening, travel, exercise, connecting with friends, disconnecting from technology. Those are all things that raise my happiness quotient, and I try to do when I find that I'm getting stressed.
Amazing. Okay, cool. As we wind down the interview, I was curious just to hear a little bit, your professional opinion, kind of today. Who are you seeing out there? Who do you think are the best fundraisers out there today in the Jewish world? And also maybe if you have some recommendations of blogs or books or things people should be reading who want to kind of delve into this profession career, sharpen their skills, get better at it?
In terms of resources, first of all, I think everybody who's listening should also be subscribing to eJewish Philanthropy. There's just a lot of updates to know about, best practices shared. It's just kind of a great way to keep on top of what's happening in the field. I would also recommend some classic books. Getting to Yes by Roger Fisher and William Ury. The Ask by Laura Fredericks, and Yours for the Asking by Reynold Levy. There's also a ton of blogs out there. You could sign up for, there's webinars, Network for Good, Chronicle of Philanthropy. These all have generating content. So I think there's a lot out there, and it's important to stay up to date on what's going on in the field.
Okay, cool. Just a last, just open-ended general question. If there's anything else, just kind of maybe we didn't touch on, if there's anything just that, just reflectively you might want to share about your current business, about life, about the world, any last kind of parting thoughts that you may have for the audience?
Sure. Well, I'll say, I think to leave maybe with one motivational thought, when we work in development, we're working with people with capacity who are, have a blessing in their lives. And it's important, I think, to remember that everybody's funds are limited at some point, right? I mean, maybe not Bill Gates, right, with the pledge you were talking about, but even major philanthropists, their gifts can only go so far, right? They can't do it alone. We talked a lot about impact philanthropy and what can I do to make the difference that I want to see in the world. But that collaboration and teamwork is really important. And that's why, donors need to give to organizations, because organizations are those partners. And you as a fundraiser, your job is to make those shidduchs, right? And to build those networks, fundraising, extension of what each of us could do personally. So I think people, probably a lot of fundraisers listening maybe have a similar story to me. They went into this field because they want to make a difference. They saw the impact that philanthropy could have. And sometimes there are challenges in the field, right? We have those, stressful situations with colleagues, things that are not working out in the external environment, multiple, our desks are overloaded with work. But to remember that our job is really connecting people to philanthropy and to the causes that they care about. And being that shadchan is really an empowering thing and really making a difference in the world. So just to keep it up.
Very good. Thank you so much. It's beautiful. Being a connector and realizing that we are conduits for good, and that we may not have the resources ourselves to give, but by making the shidduch, by making this connection, so we play a very profound role in changing the world and impacting the world for the better. Rachel, if anybody out there wants to get in touch with you, wants to benefit from your consultative services, from your company, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Sure. They could reach me by email, Rachel, Rachel at raiseadvisors.com. That's raise as in fundraise, RAISE, advisors.com. Or you could check out our website, raiseadvisors.com as well.
Okay, awesome. So thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and I look forward to being in touch in the future.
Thank you for listening to the show. If you have any feedback or comments, you can reach Rabbi Cohen at info@rabbidavidmcohen.com or on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Instagram. If you have any suggestions for participants in the program or are interested in sponsorship opportunities, contact us as well.